Yeah, it's pretty rough.
Sometimes.
Okay, I think we're good.
We good?
We're good.
Off we go. Right, first, right, so it's going to be another peer review about the book, The Demon in the Machine by Paul Davies. The reason it's a peer review is because this is, it's not like a science fiction book, that's for sure. It's basically a collection of studies to prove a point, I would say, right?
I was reading this at the coffee shop here, I don't know, this last week.
Yeah.
And
it takes a while.
Yeah, well, it's a lengthy read, but if you look at the cover, is The Demon in the Machine. So one of the people there asked, "Oh, what's that about?"
Yeah, I get that one.
So what I said is, "Oh, it's like a scary book."
Yes.
I was like, like, listen, I can't dive into this right now, especially between now and when you go get another
funny
table.
story. She's getting tattooed like the map on her shoulder.
Yeah.
And there's that, cute 20-year-old that comes in, tattoo artist from there. It's like, oh, what's that? And I go, yeah, it's quantum mechanics and this. She was like, that's very interesting. And she starts to delve into it. I'm like, what? She was like, yeah. So my first major was applied physics. And then I ran into this and this issue. So I went toward med school instead. And so she understood right away because it was in quantum mechanics and biology. And she goes like, yeah, I just chose tattooing. I was like, let's talk some more.
Yeah.
So that was that was meeting someone at the tattoo parlor. Go figure. Yeah, so you never know. Anyway, so
maybe I shouldn't have lied. Maybe I should have opened up like a much more interesting...
You never know.
I think what that meant though is I didn't want to talk to anybody.
Most likely, right? And so, but as you mentioned, this is trying to prove a point. Welcome to the academics world where it's not so much being right as proving the other guy wrong. Mm-hmm. So this is a book to say, try, motherfucker.
It really is. I told you this before we started, like the writing wise, like I appreciate good word usage. It's not actually, his sentence structure is not something crazy that just makes it confusing.
Yeah.
It is concise and thorough to where it really is, every word is written like, challenge me.
Yeah, he's a pure academic. So you guys know who that, do you know he's the head of SETI right now?
Yes, yeah.
Isn't that crazy? So, by the way, so he's a Regents Professor of Physics and Director of Beyond Center for Fundamental Concepts in Science at Arizona State University. He's for the University of London, where Carl Friston is from. He's the head of SETI. He's actually helps the oncology department at, he's one of the most, he's one of the best academics out there. He's a member of the Order of Australia. Has an asteroid named after him. That's pretty cool.
That's not the ones like you can buy your wife a star though?
No. That one is a real thing. This is when I was like, shit, I should have gone into academics. Yeah. If you get an asteroid named after you, fuck, that's a nerdier thing after the Dragon Ball Z tattoo. Then you have getting an shit. Honestly, I'm kind of jealous of that one. I won't lie. He's won many awards, including the Templeton Prize and Faraway Prize of the Royal Society. Basically, he's mastered. As a member from Snatch, he's mastered.
He's mastered.
So I was given that by Travis, from the artificial intelligence guys, by his wife actually, right?
Yeah.
She sent up, said, read this. And I'm reading it, and for me, it was extremely interesting. Not so much for what is written. Of course, I encourage you guys have to read this. This is harder to read even than What is Life by Schrodinger. Mm-hmm. This is hard read, but it's a fascinating one.
I think to prepare anyone too for reading it, look at it like this. What there is there's claims, there's a lot of good background, and then he goes into application and studies and things like that have happened.
Each claim.
And so of every single claim. So there's a lot. But what I do is I would go through and I would process the claim because it was interesting.
One at a time.
And then I could kind of just, when it gets to 5 examples of it in application, I don't need to know every specific measurement. That's how I kind of just grew.
I think it's one of those books, honestly, where you read 1 chapter a month and you take the year to finish.
Yeah.
Because the concepts are amazing, but they all around the same idea.
Mm-hmm. Thorough is definitely the word.
He's an academic, so he wants to establish that, and we're going to talk about this, there is the way science should move forward, and that is his application for that. And so he's extremely thorough, especially from the world of academics, but he's also like, look, you remember like Schrodinger in What is Life? We're going to talk about all this, but What is Life is almost apologizing for offering a certain point of view, and he almost gets pissed at it at the beginning of the book. You can tell he's like, oh, you fucker, you
pulled up short.
You backed off.
Yeah.
You did, and he doesn't.
Yeah.
And so I think that's why he's so thorough, because he was like, go ahead, attack me on this. Which I understand, because I can tell exactly where he's coming from.
No, if it's your life's work, at the very least.
And I believe he thinks it's that important. Like this is, I think in his own way, you can see the passion in this book by saying, bring it on.
And I think similar to the way that you think is that he has came up with his ideas and his concept. And then what he's done is he also has thought every avenue through to its end. Meaning every single thing that comes up here is all right, potentially if this is a hole in my deal, how do we address it?
Let's
Found
disprove
it.
it.
Boom. So
Let's
I mean,
try to disprove, and what I count was left is the truth.
And so if you're going to come up with a book of that magnitude,
you
might as well defended every.
He did what Schrodinger didn't.
Yeah.
I think
he went the distance.
I think that's really the intent of this book. Is that it was like, look, Schrodinger. It's not that he didn't have the balls. It's like we're going to talk about this, but at the time it would have been very, very hard for Schrodinger to do this. His career most likely would have been destroyed by it, so he didn't go there. And Paul Davies is like, but now we know more, and I can back it up. And so here it is, come at me.
Yeah.
And so I thought that was fascinating. You should see it. The reason at some point, like I made, not that I made fun of that in the last in the podcast we released. I think it was this Wednesday where I talk about it, where Carla was like, within 50 pages, I was like, all right, I'm good. The reason I said that is because what I'm looking for now in my studies is validation. It's not validation for me, because in a very arrogant way, I know I'm right, and this will prove that. It's just like I'm looking for ways to explain to all of you what I mean.
Yeah.
And that's what this is. This is another way for me to show, look, I'm not completely insane. What I say actually makes sense, and it has been thought and proven by some people. So my study right now is finding those people so I can introduce their concept to you guys, showing that what I say is actually grounded in reality and science.
Yeah.
So that's what that book was. But within 50 pages, I was like, I know. Great. I know. I read this. I know.
Yeah.
Except he's an established person, especially in the academics world. So you don't have. So my point is, you don't have to believe me. Believe him.
Yeah. Yeah. And he explains it. He covers every base.
So if you're one of those science purists, which is complete bullshit,
read up.
Have fun. Yeah. Bring it on. And then prove me wrong now.
Yeah.
So prove me wrong. Prove him wrong. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then after we'll go into why does this apply? What does this apply to fitness?
Yeah.
And I see in that book so what it did for me on a personal level, I guess, is it allowed me to narrow down StrongFit. Because I know exactly where I want to take it now. It's that intent.
Yeah.
That's the science of intent. That's what this is really.
Yeah. Let's get into that here. Yep. This thing starts with, like you just mentioned, with Schrodinger's What is Life? Meaning like, it's chapter 1. It's not even the prelude. It is chapter 1. Oh, it's What is Life.
It's prelude and chapter 1.
Yeah. You're right, because the whole thing is the intro to Schrodinger.
Yeah.
Then there is the thing.
Right. So I'll go back to the mea culpa that I did in that podcast, where I say I thought Schrodinger's book, What is Life, which I thought was I think I said it in a podcast, where it was the deepest idea I've ever read, right? And I thought, like, how did that not create a ripple? And I was wrong, it did.
Yeah.
Because that's basically the prelude and the first chapter, where Paul Davies said the same. It's like, that book, What is Life, changed the course of physics.
Yeah.
Changed the course of science. And I believe our understanding of life. So we're going back to quantum mechanics. Like, I think, there's a quote from, honey, can we pause for 1 second? Yeah. I forgot to get the quote. All right, there we go. All right, sorry, for once coming back to it, I was actually unprepared. I wanted to start the podcast with this quote because it's important. So I was saying, like, What is Life, I thought didn't make a ripple, but I believe it did, and more than that. So the point is, we have to explain a little bit the context of all this. So that's why I wanted to read this quote, because I believe to understand why What is Life was so important, we have to explain where science was at the time when quantum mechanics arrived, right? So this is the quote from Einstein. He says, "So many people today, and even professional scientists, seem to me like somebody who have seen thousands of trees but have never seen a forest." A knowledge of the historic and philosophical background gives that kind of independence from prejudices of his generation from which most scientists are suffering. This independence created by philosophical insight is, in my opinion, the mark of distinction between a mere artisan or specialist and a real seeker after truth. Right? And so I believe that in order to truly understand the impact of something, right, whether it's in science or anywhere, you have to understand the history, you have to study the history of the game and understand the philosophical implication of what happens, basically the background of the things you're in. And in that case, we need to understand the background of science when Schrodinger wrote it. So Schrodinger wrote that in 1944, right? And he's the one who came up with a wave function, which is the single most successful theory we ever came up with, right? Collapse is basically to know the position of electrons, to calculate position of electron. What does it matter? Because that's the reason we have computers. iPhone, all that stuff, LCD screen, it all comes out of the wave function, Schrodinger's equation, right? But quantum mechanics came about, around the 1920s. It actually started way before that with Max Planck, who started to ask certain questions. By the way, it comes really into its own in 1920, and it was basically a combination of that was 1920, I think, 25? Shit. Where it's called the Copenhagen interpretation. Anyway, where they all got into, in Copenhagen at Niels Bohr University, they all got into a room, figuratively speaking, and they started to rehash what it said because it introduced some ideas that rocked the entire world of physics. So what did it rock the world of physics? Because up till basically Einstein, we were at a position where since Isaac Newton which is like late 17th century to Einstein, we got to the point where we thought we had figured out physics.
Yeah.
Where laws of movements create a deterministic universe where, everything goes straight until it's bumped. What Isaac Newton basically did is allow us to remove religion out of science, because then there's no intent. The world is deterministic.
Yes.
If A happens, you end up with B.
It's
every
all
single time
cause,
you
effect,
see B,
cause,
you
effect.
can figure A. There's no intent. Everything goes forward.
Yeah.
Basically, the world is deterministic. Problem is, it doesn't include time. Anyway, so that deterministic view of the universe basically is 17th century, and so 18th century forward, right? And so science finally wins in a way, right? And the culmination of that was World War II. If you look at, the religion, especially the Catholic Church, has pounded on science for 1,000 years at that time, right? It's been the big brother just constantly bullying science and actually killing scientists and everything. And eventually, science starts winning. And you see that with Copernicus, Galileo, science starts winning. And through Isaac Newton, really establishing a deterministic universe, which is A causes B, down, there's no God, we're good. You go all the way to World War II, that showed that exploitation is the way forward and then religion is destroyed, right? So, that's basically how science sees religion, but that creates its own set of problems, right? Yeah, go ahead.
And I think that's an interesting thing to interject too, is because what we talk about is, so when religion had kind of been pushed out, what that means, yes, that is exactly what had happened. But what that really means is, from the science standpoint, is anything that thought it needed any sort of intelligence, intent, some sort of either consciousness or some sort of even guiding hand in decision making from within the organism.
That's creationism.
Yep, all those things become too easy to dismiss. So you just
for a good reason, because religion is a science of ignorance. Yes. What do I mean by that? Even Sir Isaac Newton, the greatest genius of mankind, right? Mm-hmm. So he figures out the moon around the Earth, right? Then he figures out the Earth elliptical nature around the sun. Then he starts to figure out the other planets and everything. And at some point, when he came down to getting the entire solar system moving around the sun, he didn't have the math anymore to calculate that. And he said, God's will. Because actually, Isaac Newton was a devout Christian.
Yeah.
Go figure, right? And so he said God's will. So what he meant by that, he was like, yeah, at some point, God's take over. 100 years later, a French astrophysicist figured out the math. That French astrophysicist was not smarter than Isaac Newton. No one else, even since then. I don't know that we'll have a greater genius than that guy. He created calculus because he needed it over the summer at 23. Like, whatever, like he's autistic as fuck. He's Asperger way. But okay, anyway, so as you say, even him, because of his very religious background, when he couldn't figure out the math, he said God's will. So he quit.
It's easier to say that than to say
But he could have figured it out further.
Yeah.
I have no doubt that if he had put 2, 3, 5 years more into it, he would have figured out the math.
Yeah.
He just stopped because he had an answer, which is God's will. That's why I say religion is the science of ignorance. It gives you an answer that allows you to not have to push forward. Mm-hmm. And so, very rightly so, science has always put a stop to that, saying we need to push forward. But he also created a religious bias where anytime you talk about intent, it's something that cannot be seen. Mm-hmm. What they want is a deterministic world, which is very weird because in itself it's a religious way of thinking. If you look at Western science, they are obsessed with one rule, one law that will explain everything. One law that explains everything is one God above all others. Yeah. It's the ascension of the Christian church over paganism, where the Vikings, the Celts had 1,000 spirits, right? Yeah. And then here comes, there has to be one God over all. It's the same shit. Like we see now with quantum mechanics, that there is not one law. There is one law based on the state you're in. And that's not me saying it. It's called self-reference. Yeah. It's where literally they're starting to understand that there is one law that directs, but that depends on the state that what you're looking at is in. For example, like whether you observe an electron or not changes it from a wave to a particle. Go double slit experiment, go Google it. So anyway, which is very funny because they're so afraid of being religious in their way of thinking that they end up creating a religious bias that created another bias that is religious in nature. Yeah. And so now they're incapable of looking at intent. It's either everything is called deterministic and everything, or basically we go the other way. So that's the background. And then here comes Einstein, who actually started by, in a way, proving that Isaac Newton was wrong. So wrong, not precise enough. There's never wrong in this. It's just precise or not. More precise or less precise. Right? For example, Isaac Newton, when he calculated the ellipse of Mercury around the sun, was slightly incorrect. He didn't quite figure it out. He took Einstein's theory of relativity to make the math work completely. So it's little stuff like that that shows you. But by the way, we still use the laws of movement. The number one law that we have of the universe is still the second law of thermodynamics. Entropy always increases. So it's not to say Isaac Newton was wrong. It's just Einstein made it more precise with the theory of relativity. Based on that, they have to push things forward and they end up in quantum mechanics. And quantum mechanics took a baseball bat to determinism. Yeah. He showed that there is no such thing as A causes B to a degree, because at the very small, which is what they mean by quantum mechanics, is a very small, randomness plays probabilities play a role. And that basically took a baseball bat to the knees of science because of what it means. Things like the double slit experiment, which we still don't understand. What's a double slit experiment? Is you have let's say a gun that shoots photons, right? And you have a part that has 2 slits in it, and then you have a sheet in the back. So if you push a photon through both, what do you get? You get basically 2 lines on the sheet, except you don't. You get 5 of them. You even get some in the middle where actually the photon cannot go through the metal. So how does that work? Because in that case, the photon is a wave, so it interacts with each other. The weird thing is, even if I shoot 1 photon at a time, so one this way, one that way, I don't know which slit is going to go through, that's the point, but it's go one way or the other, it still interacts with itself. So it's like water, it's like a wave. It doesn't have to make sense, it's just the way it is. And then, so the funny thing about this is, so even one at a time interacts with itself, which no one understands what it means. But the funny part about this is, if you actually if you try to determine which hole the photon went through by putting a measurement, right, on each slit, then it's only 1 photon at a time, then you end up with 2 lines on the sheet. So whether you look at it or not changes the experiment. That's still fucking people's mind. So there's a number of things.
The actual result, not just what you're seeing when you're seeing it.
It changes the result. So if I look at it, it's a particle that goes straight, so this is deterministic almost. If I don't look at it, then I get a wave.
It's exactly like if people watch Kayla lift.
Yes.
then she completely
Exactly. Whether
gives up.
someone is watching or not, it will change the result of what happens. It's exactly that. So anyway, so quantum mechanics is a revolution because not just in what it allowed us to do, but in the way we look at the universe. It forced us to go, we don't understand.
Yeah.
We thought we did, and we were all sure of it, and actually we didn't. So here comes Schrodinger, right? So the wave function, he calculates where the electron is going to end up, the probabilities, all that stuff, right? And then from there, in 1944, he writes a book that is What is Life, where he's trying to explain that on the biological level, the laws of quantum physics have to work as well. So he's touching something that is forbidden, which is mixing physics and biology. People have tried and got plastered over.
And there's a lot in depth on that subject in this book too, is that crossover between physics and biology. And I think it's so, me being outside of that realm, I'm looking at it, I'm like, well, it all exists in the same fucking universe here. Why in the world?
Yes, because we're getting way too close to God.
Yeah.
So that's where the whole religious stuff come in. Whenever you mix physics and biology, or you're stepping into a landmine, and many careers have been ruined by that. Yeah, it's hardly the first one, by the way. Yeah. There's a guy named Desjardins. He was a French paleontologist, I believe. He was also a member of the church. He got excommunicated from talking about this. William Reich tried to go with the orgone energy, which is fucking insane anyway, but he got burned to the stake for that one. You had a very, very famous Italian mathematician. I forgot the name. He died, and then basically all his work disappeared. You have to read this because with your conspiracy thing, you love it. You love it. So there's a number of people that got burned to the stakes by doing that. Like, you're not allowed to go biology and physics. Like, in the world of academics, it will bury your career because you're getting way too close to stuff you're not. Yeah, I mean, like, back to the religious bias. You can't be, if you're fully religious and a scientist, you will have some explaining to do. Mm-hmm. Right? It's, well, which, and again, I understand completely. By the way, I am bashing neither of those. I'm an atheist, but I'm not bashing religion by any chance. It's just like, usually religion and science don't go hand in hand.
That's an interesting thing, actually, to talk about for you is, I mean, you don't believe in God, generally speaking, and pretty
not even in details, generally or in detail.
But you talk about it pretty openly. But what is interesting here is, in this case and in these cases here, you still very specifically are defending the idea with which of intent. And a guiding purpose beyond just cause and effect. Yes. That every living thing has, and like that's the piece,
and it's obvious.
Yeah.
The problem is people confuse intent and consciousness.
And I think though it's interesting hearing you say those things, right? Yep. Because it's like they're adjacent in understanding, but the execution's very different.
Yes, and do I mean intent? Totally.
Yeah.
Right, but again, do I mean God? Not at all.
Yeah.
Do I mean a different interpretation of the Bible? Not at all.
Yeah.
To me, the Bible was created by men, and that's as far as it goes. There is, that's an opinion because no one knows, right? But in my opinion, there is no consciousness, higher consciousness out there.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't mean there is no.
Do you believe that then, though, that I still think there is a level of consciousness with which we have.
Yeah.
And then also a level of intent that life has. That still seems to be like there is some overarching theory that I think we just don't understand.
Exactly. Okay. So,
and that's why it gets lumped into something else.
My point is AlphaZero.
Yeah.
Did AlphaZero play better chess than us? Yes, but he has no consciousness.
Yeah.
But he can. My point of AlphaZero is very important because we're going back to Stockfish, right? Stockfish can beat any human, but he does it through memorization. He does it through calculating, as a good computer does, and you can't make mistakes. But he doesn't understand chess. So there's a difference. It's an idiot that bullies you into winning.
Just really good at math.
Really good at math, and it bullies you. All right, so that is what computers are. So a human still understands chess better than Stockfish. But then here comes AlphaZero, and that's why it blew my mind. Here comes AlphaZero, who understands chess better than a human. He created new ways of playing position we've been studying for 1,500 years. It understands chess. He had ideas, genius ideas that none of us, not even, like the Greish, they go like, oh, like guys are mind blown by the ideas that AlphaZero brought forward. Right. And he didn't do it through memorization because he didn't memorize any game. It's just the code got better. So, and that's the important part, is AlphaZero understands chess, but AlphaZero has no consciousness, right? He has no intelligence in the human term, but yet when it comes to chess, he understood the game. So that's why we, in that sense, and intent, like the code gets better at every time. See, it does not require consciousness to understand the concept.
Yeah.
And that's what I found AlphaZero mind blowing, because it tells you like you can have intelligence
and not consciousness.
and non-consciousness.
Which was I mean, of course,
depending what you define as intelligence.
Yeah, there was maybe a bit of a segue for a deviation from the book.
Yeah, but we'll go back to.
But there was an interesting thing that I had seen too. They said people worry that there's like some sort of like Terminator level AI.
Skynet is coming.
It's like no. There's a big difference between intelligence and consciousness. It's very different.
So there's different kind of intent.
Yeah.
Like Skynet has the intent to kill people, but that's an intent based on consciousness.
Yeah.
Right. Where there seems to be a different level of intent, for example, for life, where it's just to perpetuate itself. But that intent of perpetuate itself is not consciousness, like Skynet deciding at some point, randomly or not, to go like, I'm going to murder everybody.
Yeah. Well, and your self-driving Tesla
Yes.
isn't good at poker.
But it has an
chess.
intent.
Yeah.
Which is not hitting other cars. So they're going to say, well, it just follows the code. Yes, and there's the problem. And that's what we're going to talk about.
So let's do...
Yeah. Okay, so let's finish what is life.
Okay.
Right? Let's finish what is life. We'll do it into 2 podcasts. Because I want to explain this one thoroughly, because I believe it's that important. So here comes Schrodinger trying to get biology and quantum mechanics together. And so it's a very, very touchy subject. So he goes into it extremely carefully. Right, we made a podcast about that. And he goes into, look, if I follow quantum mechanics, this is what needs to be there on a quantum mechanical level, right, for life to keep going. And he talks about a code being created that can be passed on from, parents to children. And then from there he explained, but look, like the body temperature is 37 degrees. In order to not be destroyed because of thermodynamics law, like entropy always increases, it would have to be a very, very strong structure that basically almost like a crystal type, but with some adaptability to it. So it's an atypical crystal form. So it keeps going on and on and on. And basically what he's doing is he's describing DNA. What I forgot at the time, that's what I explained in the podcast, is that at the time he wrote it, 1944, there was no such thing as DNA. It had not been discovered yet. Yeah. And so the 2 guys that discovered DNA did it based on that book. Based on what is life, because they go like, we have to look for what is describing.
There's a function being served. We have no idea what does it.
But something,
we know something is happening.
So basically what he did is he drew a roadmap to DNA. And he did it through a thought experiment. Like it has to be that way. So he knew he was there before, just like the Higgs boson. We knew he was there before experimentation showed us. The DNA, Schrodinger knew there was a need for the DNA, therefore it had to be there. And then by knowing that, then he directed people to look for it and find it where it should have been.
Yeah.
That's what intelligence, by the way, also is on the human intelligence, is we, by logical means, we can find stuff that are, even that you're not capable specifically to test yet. So that was the importance of what is life. And he introduced that idea of biology and physics. Can we figure out physics or life in general through, it's basically a crossroads. So we had biology and physics that allow us to move forward toward what is life. But that wasn't enough, right? Because the book, basically What is Life, introduces the idea of there is something opposite to entropy. Entropy is the second law of thermodynamics. It's the amount of disorder of a system. Non-life has entropy, always increases. So any non-life systems goes from order to disorder. And then here he comes and he says, yes, but life goes the other way. Life seems to be working toward fighting entropy. So, and then that's what Schrodinger refers as negative entropy. It's like, I don't want to say life force because that's vitalism. That's exactly what he was trying to get away from. But it's like life has his own thing he tries to create to fight entropy. And he leaves it at that. And then that's why I was fascinated by Carl Friston, because Carl Friston took it back in the 2000 plus. And him, instead of going from quantum mechanics, he went at it from probability mathematics and say, look, this is what life does. It tries to fight entropy and he has his own way of doing it. That's a prediction model, the podcast that we did, right? And then here comes this book that goes even a step further than that. What's very interesting in this book is he never talks about Carl Friston.
That is interesting.
They're both from the University of London.
And
bring me on the conspiracy on that one. Come on, there's got to be Does he not know about each other? I find that extremely hard to believe. He has to know about
Here's
Carl
what
Friston.
if I had to just guess,
Yeah.
and this is totally stupid
No,
speculation.
but that's why, conspiracy.
It's two really brilliant people at the tops of their field, and I don't know that maybe they
both
just don't
Brits,
get along.
both from the university. Oh, come on, it has to be that, right?
Right?
They're both from the University of London. They're both Brits. And they're both at the top of their field. One goes from physics, the other one from probability mathematics. And he says stuff where I was like, that's a segue into Friston.
Yeah.
And he never goes there.
Never. Unless
there's no fucking way doesn't know about Carl Friston.
The other thing would be maybe that he mentions it in the thing and just knows that it'll give Carl Friston his space to speak on Carl Friston stuff because that's what he is and he does. And maybe because he's more thorough at that thing.
How could he not even mention the name?
I don't know.
I find that so weird. Yeah. There's no way science is fragmented to the point where it doesn't know about Carl Friston.
Certainly not. Yeah.
It's not possible.
Yeah.
Anyway. So, no, it's just like from a conspiracy perspective. I was like, when is he getting... So I started to go like this, going like, he's going to talk about Carl Friston, right?
And
he never gets there.
If they were in disagreement, conceptually, I would get it. But
they're not, on the contrary. They totally agree on the same stuff. There's something there.
Yeah.
Just saying,
maybe there's a place where you don't want to have to defend somebody else's work while you're defending your own.
But you still didn't mention his name.
That's
kind of weird.
Yeah.
They're both from the University of London. Anyway, right. So Carl Friston goes.
You guys need to work it out.
Yeah, okay. Exactly. And I need to know what happened. That's what I know, because that's my TMZ mind right there. Anyway, and then this book goes one step further than Carl Friston. So we go quantum mechanics, biology, and he's introducing computer science. Why? Because again, we're going at entropy, right? And what is the opposite of entropy? And he basically has the whole book is to say that what is the opposite of entropy is information.
Yeah.
That is why, because information allows you to minimize surprises, which is the work of Carl Friston.
Yeah.
The more information you have, the less surprises, the less entropy. So he's saying basically information, and that doesn't mean today's forecast. It means bits of information
from a
on
data standpoint,
from a quantum mechanical level.
Yeah, and I think it's about certainty.
Right. If you want to understand what I mean by information, you have to go into read Black Hole War by Leonard Susskind.
Okay.
Yeah, the Black Hole War. That's the first book I put.
I don't think I've read that. Did I fuck up?
Did you fuck up too? Did you not know that book?
I don't know.
How dare you? How do you guys? It's the first book I put on the StrongFit book club.
I'm new here.
She's new here.
How dare you? That's the first book I put on the StrongFit book club. Leonard Susskind.
You might have put
The World is a Hologram.
You might have put that. Okay, well, those are concepts I'm pretty well versed in.
Okay, the world is a hologram.
Yeah.
That comes. Okay, so like Leonard Susskind proved Stephen Hawking wrong.
I don't know.
Oh my God!
Well, we went over kind of in depth on especially where the surface information.
I am so disappointed. Okay, so let's go about this.
Listen, I'm not.
This is a 2-part podcast, maybe 3-part.
Julian,
I have to educate him.
Julien puts a book in the book club.
Fuck yeah!
2.5 years ago, probably.
Best book ever.
While I'm like running 2 businesses and have a day job.
Whatever.
And Julian's like, you didn't read that book?
Priorities, dude. Priorities. Anyway, so this is gonna be a 6-part podcast because I have to educate Tyler now. So. There's a guy in San Francisco, very rich, who had a hobby which was physics.
Okay.
Billionaire dude. And he has in his house, the attic, he got the best minds in physics talking for an evening once in a while.
Okay.
So, man, I would love to be a fly on that wall. But anyway, and then one day, here comes Stephen Hawking, who introduces an idea. So entropy always increases. What does that mean? That means that information, so bits of what makes the universe, right, can never be destroyed. Information keeps on going, is never destroyed. And I'm like, all right. So Stephen Hawking is at that time had come up already with what is called Hawking's radiation, which is that a black hole creates radiation. So that over time, a black hole diminishes in size. Okay. Because it emits radiation, so it goes everywhere. Yeah, exactly. Dissipation of the black hole. It's like, all right, information follows into the black hole, right? Black hole evaporates. Where's information? It's gone. Mm-hmm. Right. So, but information is gone. That basically violates the second law of thermodynamics. Yeah. So he's saying there's a way that the second law of thermodynamics is incorrect. That is, people don't understand what that meant at the time. But this is
That's at the root of a lot in here too, though. With
it's a rule of not even physics, of science. He talks about it. Like in physics, you can violate or bend any law, but that one. Mm-hmm. That is the one where if what you say violates that, what you say is wrong. Don't care what your proof is. That is what Leonard Susskind called that the -1 law. Because it's not the second law, then you become the first law, then it becomes a zero law, and it's a minus first, because that is one thing you can't fuck with, is entropy always increases. Yeah. So Leonard Susskind intuitively says, but that's not possible. So what is, and from there basically developed an entire idea that the world is a hologram. So what does that mean? In the case of a black hole, that means that because there's two, just like the Slit experiment, right? There's two realities to a black hole. First of all, from you outside of a black hole, you have to understand that someone that goes into a black hole, you will never see that person get to the black hole, get to the horizon. Because as he gets closer to the horizon, time slows down to a freeze. Mm-hmm. So that means if you're on the outside, you will never see anybody get into a black hole. But to the person crossing the black hole, time goes as normal. Does it make sense? Don't worry. Welcome to quantum mechanics. And so there's you seeing the person, and then there's the person itself. Going back to a little bit the state of the electron. It's the same idea, right? Okay. So, but once the person goes into the black hole, where is that information? So what we discovered is that when the person goes into the black hole, that person is still alive. But for us, basically, that information would be splattered all over the black hole. Yeah. So the information would be everywhere because for us, the person in a way ceases to exist. Not for the person himself. He keeps going into the black hole until he gets spaghettified. Yeah. But for us, the information would be all over the black hole. Not that he can reach the black hole. Not that he can't even reach the horizon for us. Anyway, it's a problem with all this. But so the idea was that we started to see, and that was a very interesting idea, is like if you take a ball, right? Everything that we need to know about the ball, the information of the ball, you would expect would be like the volume of the ball. Yeah. The volume of the ball. And actually, no, the information is contained on the surface of the ball. Whatever is inside, whatever the information about what is inside is contained on the outside of the balloon. And so that introduced like the idea the world is a hologram. Yeah, the dog needs attention. So that was, and that's the Black Hole War book and everything. What I find very interesting is, I wonder if there's a parallel between that and, Carl Friston with a cell. Mm-hmm. You have interaction from the outside, from inside of the cell to the outside inside. And all the interaction happens on the membrane of the cell in a Bayesian blanket kind of way. Is that the same thing as the black hole? It
sounds really similar.
Exactly. So I'd be curious to know if the concepts are related. That'd be so interesting, right?
Now, one of the things that just hangs in my head when we talk about this from an information standpoint is, and this is a thing you described too, along with thermodynamics, is that energy cannot, or that information cannot be destroyed.
No.
Correct?
That's the point.
And that was a thing that I remember having come across was, energy.
Yes.
Can't be created.
It can dissipated. Be changed.
It can be changed.
But never.
And information. And once information was kind of lumped into that same thing, and I started thinking about just all of those concepts using information and data and how that works, it becomes very interesting in seeing how life can transfer from one to another and how the amount of information that gets passed. But you're right, that starts to sound like some sort of strange.
You're going into intent.
Almost religion or intent or something like that. So that's why we have to. Yeah.
So it's that. I believe. So he goes into that by saying like there is a new field of science now that we don't have a name for, that has quantum mechanics, biology, and computer science mixed in. Why computer science? Because this is the only science that we have that deals with information. Mm-hmm. So to the point where Leonard Susskind 2 years ago started to talk about the progress in quantum mechanics being made because of computer science. Yeah. He had to turn to the computer geeks in order to go toward information because they're the only one who think about that. Right? So computer science is actually evolving quantum mechanics and in that sense biology because they're the only one again dealing with the concept of information. This is a new frontier, is understanding information. Mm-hmm. Information, it gets very tricky. We're going to go over that because you run into intent real fast.
Yes.
Right. And that's where it got very touchy. So Schrodinger did not want to go into that. And that's where Paul Davies goes into. Paul Davies, you can tell, he's almost pissed at the fact that Schrodinger didn't go there, and he was like, fuck it, I'll do it.
Yeah.
And so that's what this is a book about. The Demon is a book about information. What that and how does all that stuff creates. And so that's so you can see.
Should we jump into the? I want to do the demon and the intent.
Right, because that explains intent.
Yeah, I think that
I
gets
like
us
it
there.
this way.
So I can kind of go through. So generally, the way this works is it's an explanation of the way the law of thermodynamics works,
Yes,
right? But one of the things is basically, as a former heating and air conditioning guy, I understand these concepts pretty well.
Exactly.
So anyway, what
quantum
happens?
mechanics, air conditioning.
Exactly. But what happens is basically anything that's warm is going to basically migrate towards things that are cold. The faster moving. Right? So when you talk about developing a movement system, very often you can do any number of these things, but that movement of air or water, as long as you have a temperature difference and they're separate, you can create movement. You can move a wheel.
That's how the steam engine.
Yep.
You get very hot here. It creates an in.
I've seen people. It's the same principle. You can make your own little solar wall outside where you can heat a spot where it's just you let the hot come in. And so,
and so where the heat comes from, that comes from entropy.
Exactly.
Entropy is measured in heat. So as you increase entropy, it gets hotter.
Yeah. So one of the talks about this was if everything was kept at the exact same temperature, every molecule is the exact same temperature. Still, for some reason, some will move slightly faster than others.
Yes, and so Maxwell did the not the formula, but the
thought experiment, basically.
But he calculated. He did the actual. It's not a theorem because it's not math. But fuck, anyway, I'm blanking about the name. But he basically figured that out.
Yeah. So what this is though is if you were to simply sort, everything's the same temperature.
Yeah.
If you were to simply sort the faster moving from the smaller moving apart, now you have adding nothing else but the intent of sorting that's it. You have now created the space with which you now can create essentially free movement.
Exactly. So we're going to go exactly what
which is a huge violation.
So that's what he called of the law, right? So that's what we call Maxwell demon. So Maxwell calculated exactly. So anything that is at a certain temperature, again, you have particles. So how do you make hotter? You make them move faster. The particles move faster, right? But some will move faster than others, always. There's a differential, right? So he calculated the law, right, to understand the differential between each particle. So his idea was, let's imagine I have a demon, which means a particle the same size as all the molecules, except it has intent.
His job is to sort.
That means he can see which one moves faster or slower, and he has a wall. And in the wall, there's a slit.
Yeah.
And anytime he sees something moves faster, he's going to open the slit and put it on the right. And he's seeing that is slower than that one on the right, he's going to put on the left. So he's going to sort them out and put them into two different parts. And by doing that, that means everything on the right will be moving faster than everything on the left. So that means everything on the right will be warmer, everything on the left will be colder.
And when I read this, what I looked at it is I just look at you have a fixed, I wouldn't even call it a system because there is no system. There's nothing happening at that moment.
Yeah.
And all you have done is applied intent, basically. Some sort of conscious sorting. And that's such a basic, I like it because it's a very basic binary example.
Exactly.
Whatever this thing is, they call it the demon, and it's just this little, sorting thing it is.
Yes.
All it has to know is faster, slower. But
doesn't matter.
But because of that, you have only added whatever power intent has, right?
But that's the thing. Through intent, you have reversed the second law of thermodynamics.
Yeah.
Because you went from something that was stable because the disorder got spread out because it increases to creating order because now you have cold and hot.
Yeah.
Right. And through intent, you have reversed the second law of thermodynamics, which is not possible.
Yeah. And an interesting thing is, so they go through, that's the most basic, I would say, explanation of it that they give. And of course, the follow-up does, well, show me the demon. It's not a real thing. It's like, well, we get
that's
that.
Not the point.
It's a thought experiment. But then he goes through, I would say, about 6 or 7 other types of physical constructs that could be made to do it, where it makes the effort required to sort much easier, much more effective.
Exactly.
And all of a sudden it becomes a thing where it's like, all right, so if we only add the intellect part.
Exactly. But the problem too is he gets to a moment, and that's what it shows, where you realize that that's what life does. So Carl Friston, right, Free Energy in the Brain, that's the paper he wrote in 2012, I believe.
Yeah.
No, 2008. Whatever. Between 2000 and 2000 and whatever it was, he wrote the stuff, Free Energy in the Brain, where what he was explaining is that that's exactly what life does. Life fights free energy, fights entropy, tries to reverse it. So the science of information basically got to the same point Carl Friston got to from two different branches. One did it from probability mathematics, the other one from pure physics, to say that intent allows you to fight entropy. And so that was, it's a massive, massive moment, right?
Well, it just sounds to me like, especially when you define what entropy is now, I think that statement extrapolated upon is intent is essentially what is one of the main shaping tools of life, if not
the main shaping tool of life. So again, the idea of all this was, what is life? We still don't understand what is life. The closest we're getting to explain what life is through the Carl Friston work. Like that's because people don't understand, like, what is life? Like, how does it happen or stuff like that? It's not nearly that simple.
Yeah.
And without that science of intent, that science of information, you run into constant problem, because most people think, where are we? It's all DNA, you know, all chemical stuff, intent versus consciousness. Okay, we went to it. Yeah, where it's all chemical stuff. You know, like we talked about this many times toward the fitness, where everybody wants nutrition, everything to be just a chemical reaction. Everything is DNA and stuff like that, right? And that's where Darwin got into it also. Is like you have a set of DNA, right? And then you have random mutation, and then the survival of the fittest happen, and then that's how basically evolution works.
Yeah.
What intent is showing you is like, that's not entirely true, right? Like, so the problem is random.
That also doesn't explain the pace.
The problem is random.
Yeah.
It's not random. Okay, so we're going to go into all this. But so
let me back up. The thing that I was saying
exactly,
is my understanding, we had talked about this before, maybe even on the podcast, was growing up, my understanding of all of that stuff was that, like, just sexual selection, survival of the fittest.
Exactly.
But the pace, I could never
it doesn't work like
justify.
That. Right. So there's a guy named...
It never made sense.
There's a guy who talked about this at the same time as Darwin, and his name was Lamarck. He was a French geneticist, I guess. Basically like Darwin, right? Yeah. Evolutionary biologist. And he says, look, it's not just survival of the fittest, there has to be a rival of the fittest, where nature seems to come up with ideas that are really, really good, really, really fast. So the problem with random, and I'll explain what it is, by the way, it can be calculated. You can calculate random, it's probability mathematics, we've done it. If we calculate the probability of nature's success and what we see, we realize that nature is the luckiest thing that has ever existed by a mile.
Yeah.
It's just, it doesn't work like that. Very good example is the one you sent me stuff about. Remember that bird? The bird, like a guy wiped out 300 years ago. So he lives on an island. The island gets flooded. That bird is gone.
There's zero left.
Zero left, right? And we know because of people taking images, drawing images at the time, and then the bones and all that stuff, right? 300 years later, we see the same bird popping up again.
Yeah.
Right.
I believe this same bird has come back three or four separate times. I believe three, I think it's 3 or 4, where it had been gone, or arrived, eradicated, arrived, eradicated.
Right.
And I think it's like a third appearance.
If you look at evolution being random mutation, to get back to that, it is feasible.
Certainly feasible.
But the chances of it happening twice in a row, like that, or 3 times, we can calculate that, are so low that at some point you have to go, So here's the problem. That means that nature found a way to accelerate the process. It found a way to get lucky. It manipulates the thing in order to know that this didn't work, but this worked, right? So that basically nature keeps track to get his chances at success better. That requires intent. And that's where the conversation gets weird.
And I think it also requires that carryover of information.
Exactly.
Because what we have, because what gets us from this bird that at some point was the most logical next step for this system, right?
Right.
Was like, okay, this is where we are. If you're going to get to the point, and that's gone now, that bird still came into existence because it was built upon all of the information of everything before it, via epigenetics, via experiencing its environment, being all of these things, it's brought in, and somehow that still has to be passed. Now, just because all those animals are gone, that information still exists in the world.
Exactly.
In every plant in that island, every other animal in that island, everything, like all that still exists somewhere.
So there's the problem.
So
is
something
that tracking.
close enough.
Right. So that means that there's a passing of information. There's a tracking.
With a purpose too.
Right.
Because it got there
exactly.
multiple times.
So again, and that's the problem. This is when people say God.
Yeah.
They'll use it as a way to bash science to say God exists. No. What we're saying is that nature, life has a tracking mechanism and can pass on that information. So people say, well, that's what DNA does. But remember, that bird got wiped out. So the DNA is wiped out as well.
Yeah.
But yet nature kept track. So that's what they say, that's not possible. Because that means God. But that's, okay, so first of all, no, it does not mean God, because when people say God, they imply consciousness. Mm-hmm. That's what you mean by God, means there's a consciousness out there
I need
that
this.
says, I want this.
Yeah.
That's not what we're saying. What we're saying is that nature, what the book basically that science is getting us, is saying life as a way to keep track. Mm-hmm. What does that mean? So in it talks about a fascinating experiment that I read about, and then I will explain everything you need to know. It's the flatworm. The flatworm is the animal that we think developed the first nervous system out there, right? We're talking 600 million years ago, right? Yeah. Anyway, so there's a head, right, with two eyes, and then there's a tail.
Not the prettiest animal you'll ever see.
No, it's way from back then. You cut it in half, right? And where the tail was, it grows a tail, and then on the side, where the second part is, it grows a head. So that was the whole stuff. Is how
one organism to two.
Exactly, and then it's twice the same organism. Yeah. So DNA is passed on. It's exactly twice the same organism. And you go, how does he know where to grow a head and a tail? We go, oh, that's fine, that's DNA. Okay, but how does it work? So that's where epigenetics comes in, right? And they go like, well, look, and they saw that what's very interesting is in order to...
Before we go, I think, because it's easy to say, well, obviously it knows to grow a tail because that piece has a head. It's like, well, back up.
Yeah, how does it know?
The head isn't telling it to do any of these things.
Exactly.
Every single cell is replicating and growing out into the thing. So how does this one know
to make a tail,
to become an eye at some point? You know, it doesn't...
Or to make a tail.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or to do the complete opposite.
Right. So it seems...
So it's not as simple, right?
No,
it's
but
like,
the problem with the way
lost
people
a thumb,
are like, oh, there's DNA.
I need a
it's
thumb.
like people don't understand the finesse, the finesse, the greatness of the requirement in order to make a tail and not a head.
Yeah.
It's not that fucking... People think it's simple because they went through biology in sixth grade and slept through the class, but it actually requires so much to be able to figure out if it's a tail or a head.
Yeah. Because that's an option. You got to remember, most of these animals that you see that they lose a tail, they just grow that tail back. That tail doesn't become a new fucking thing.
Yeah,
that tail goes away.
Exactly. Well, with the flatworm, it creates two different ones. But again, how does he know if it's a head or a tail to grow? That requires a lot more. Just because you've seen it happen all the time doesn't mean it's
simple.
It's common. It's not normal.
Yeah.
Right. Anyway, so what they figure out basically through epigenetics, that's how basically it knows from a head for a tail. It seems there's a voltage. It's the electric field of the organism that tells you if it's a head or a tail. It's not exactly electric field, it's voltage differential. Yeah. I'm going to say electric field because otherwise I don't want to say voltage differential every time, it's too hard.
Yeah.
Technically it's not an electric field, but fuck off. And through the modification of the electric field, he knows if it's a tail or a head to grow. How do we know that? Simple. We're going to put rocket fuel on it, which fucks up with electric field, and that worm is going to grow two heads. Right? Yeah. Because we fucked with the way it processes information. Mm-hmm. So we didn't fuck with the DNA, we fucked with the RNA. Yeah. The expression of the DNA. So maybe we have to, RNA is just, that's what epigenetics is focusing on. It's basically expression of the DNA. I can't go into, it's RNA.
That'll be multiple episodes or something.
You want to know more? Read the fucking book.
Yep.
So by fucking with the RNA, it basically makes the worm create two heads. Here comes the interesting part. Now, we wipe out the worm from all rocket fuel and everything, we cut it in half. You cut it in half, you would get head, tail, since the DNA is being transferred. And except, that's not what you get. What you get is two heads. So, we passed on the information.
So they messed up the electric field, if you will. Created a head, tail, a tail.
To mess up with the RNA.
Yep, correct.
To create head.
Yep.
Right? We take that head, right? Yep. But now, basically, genetically speaking, it's the same as the early one. So normally, if we cut it...
Its DNA is identical.
Identical. It's actually the same creature as the first one, because that's how the flatworm works, right? So it's the same earlier. So if it's the same as the first one, you cut it in two, you get two with head and tail.
Yeah.
Except you don't get that. You get two heads. The information was passed on. Not the DNA. The RNA was passed on. The information was passed on.
Yeah.
How? We have no fucking clue.
Yeah.
But it seems that basic mechanism, it is the mechanism of learning that life has, that it can create evolution at such a high rate of success. It keeps track.
Yeah.
It keeps passing on information on what it knows work versus what it doesn't. So, and that was the point. That was what the point was Lamarck was trying to make, is there is also a rival of the fittest. Nature has a success rate that is far too high. So that's not to say Darwinism isn't true. The idea of Darwinism is you get life, you get mutation,
Yeah.
right? You get random mutation, and then the survival of the fittest happens.
I think those overarching concepts
It's
all work.
totally true. No. But it's not to say there's no survival of the fittest. That's not the point. The only thing is when he says random.
Yeah.
Random mutation. That's the part. It doesn't seem random is not the correct term.
Random lacks
Because it can
intent.
Exactly. So,
Well,
for example,
back
if you
up.
look at this,
we could go down the other route where,
Yeah.
then the randomness is the whatever. But
but no, we can go. I can explain that. That's not in the book. But like, for example, this talking to Travis, he was telling me they tried to get an AI to mimic the way humans walk.
Yeah.
Right. And so they got the good old fashioned, which is get better at incrementally like that. Right. And they got an AI that can't walk for shit. Like he works like in a weird way that is not even close to humans. But then they created something that is called an algorithm that is called novelty search. And the point of the novelty search is the AI creates an algorithm that forces the AI to try something new every time that has not been tried before. Yeah. And out of that AI, he pulverized the result of the other and got actually close to human walk.
And I think it's important too when you said that tried something new. So that's not a lot of people would interpret that initially as random.
Nope.
It's like no.
Exactly.
The fact that
that's a mistake I made too. I was like, so it's a randomizer. I was like, no. That's exactly what it's not.
Yeah, because it's for sure is not something that has already been tried.
It is not random. Yeah. Because if you do random and you flip a coin 10 times, you could get 10 times in a row.
Yeah. And
the
even if you've got
extremely small.
But even if you've got 9 heads in a row, you go to flip the 10th, your odds of getting heads on that 10th time are just the same as they were the first time too.
Except the chances of getting 10 times in a row are astronomically low. But the chances are the same every time. Yeah. Right. So that's you have to understand probability, the laws of probability.
But that's really interesting because that isn't random. That is actually this long, deliberate process of deductive reasoning.
Of keeping track. That means something keeps track.
Yeah.
Right.
Everything
is exactly, and that's what all this goes into. It is like nature keeps track. How? No fucking clue. Yeah. That's how the worm stuff tells you, though, is something is being passed on the RNA. That's why we talk about junk DNA. It seems that there's an activation of the RNA. Anyway, but the point is that it's not just survival of the fittest. Arrival of the fittest seems to be something. In life, information is passed on. We're going back to Schrodinger, we're going back to Carl Friston that says, but free energy of the brain, the point of life is to minimize surprises. Why? So the point of life is to minimize surprises is to gain information, is to keep track of information.
Yeah.
And here goes the problem of that requires intent. That's the thing about DNA. DNA is a code that passes on. Okay, but a code is written for a goal.
Yeah.
Always. Okay, so that requires intent. There's no DNA in rocks.
No.
Because it has no intent. But life, to pass on, DNA is a code. All right, who started the fucking code? There has to start somewhere. All right, so to start a code, you need to have a goal. To have a goal, you need to have intent. Life has intent, not necessarily consciousness. No.
Yeah.
Right, so a cell, an amoeba, does not have consciousness, but it has intent.
But it's got a purpose.
It has a purpose, which is to replicate itself.
Yeah.
And that's the part where everybody is so uncomfortable, right? Because you're going toward God. And I think that's the biggest problem we have is, for example, in the fitness industry, like all the guys, it's either hardware, DNA, that's what the body does, and then this human consciousness and the choices people make in their everyday life that impacts. And that's the two ways we look at it. And it seems there's a third thing that is exactly the gap between the two, which is intent. Life intent, not my intent as the head of StrongFit or your intent as consciousness. We're not talking about that. There's an intent of life. So you have the basic chemistry set, and you have intent of life, and then you have intent of consciousness. And those are 3 different things. The problem is that second one we're not looking into.
Yeah.
And that's where all my work on the states of the nervous system comes in. It's that gap between the two,
Yeah.
right? It's that intent. And then there's a number of things like that are fascinating. Okay, we can get into the cancer stuff. That I found fascinating of that, but that's basically the point they're making is like there is an intent there that is not to be confused with the religious aspect of consciousness.
Yeah.
And that's such an important thing because then from there you can establish, then we'll make a number of podcasts in the weeks to come basically about that, the role of intent, for example, in what does it mean to gain fat versus burning enough and everything, because then we can go at the nervous system representing intent that is different from a conscious decision, so which is a very important part because most of what we look in the fitness industry as psychology refers to conscious choices.
All about decision making.
But so when we talk about unconscious, we never know what we're referring to. That's Freud is like adding conscious over there. That might very well relate to life intent. Like, so the nervous system, for example, will have its own intent that obeys the, if you want to call it the laws of life, whatever, that basically your system will always go toward that intent first. And then your conscious decision might not mix well, but there's going to be another layer than what your DNA does and what your conscious decision is. There's another level that we have not looked at before.
Yeah.
And that is, and that's where everything is that. So that's why that book is fascinating because it keeps going exactly on the. There's a kid getting slaughtered outside. So if you hear the noise, I don't know what's in, but that.
I doubt they can hear it. They heard that.
No, they heard that.
Jesus.
That kid is dying. Is it?
It's gonna if I don't get down there.
Yeah, Jeez. Exactly, man. Yeah, have kids. It's fine. So the key is that it's like all the work that I've done on nervous system is that it's like, guys, there's expression, like energy system or everything, and that's the point I was always trying to make. Is like, yeah, there is the DNA, there is we all agree there's chemical reactions. Yeah. The question is why are the chemical reactions taking place? There is something directing.
Yeah.
Those, and it's basically what they call a self-reference. Is like every state has its own laws in physics, not in what I say, in just in the pure physics, right? So basically the laws, depending on the state you're in, refers to what I talk about all the time, state versus action and all that stuff. It seems that your body will react a certain way based on the intent of the system. And that's where I believe the nervous system and all of that comes in, is that the nervous system represents the intent that your whole system has. That is not the same as your conscious choices.
Because we focus so much on the chemistry side of things.
Or the psychology. It's one or the other. Yeah. Right?
And I think...
And then the psychology, because we can't measure it, most guys are like, yeah, whatever.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But you get in and focus so hard on the chemistry stuff and you miss out on and that's what happens when people talk with the human body, things like hormones and all those other things. It's like, all right, but you cannot just look at that for what that is, because that you always have to pull
Although you're looking at non-life.
There's a reason.
Yeah, you're looking at non-life. Yeah. When you do that, you're looking at water boiling and saying that's what life does, except it's not.
Yeah.
Otherwise, the flatworm cannot pass on information.
Yeah.
Right? Otherwise, evolution does not work the way it works. Otherwise, randomness will not allow us to be where we are. Like, there's an entire thing about how life is created, like I could get into, but it doesn't work like that. So when you're stuck about the chemistry saying this does that, you have a deterministic view of the universe. You have an Isaac Newton view of the universe, which works for non-life. Mm-hmm. Life has an intent, which is to perpetuate itself. That's a Carl Friesen, that's all that stuff. And so if you do not integrate that, you will miss as to why the chemical reaction happens the way it happens. Of course it happens, but the problem is you won't understand, if you don't understand the concept, the context of the why, then you'll end up with maybe it happens, maybe it doesn't, which is what we see nutrition program, maybe it works, maybe that, because you're not integrating the intent that life has for that system. Yeah. And that's always been my point, is that the nervous system precedes the energy system. Right? Like whether you train in a pool is not the same thing as training in the ocean, even though chemically speaking, the reactions should be the same, but they're not, because in the ocean, you're in a state of fear, for example, right? Mm-hmm. That changes your being in a state of relaxation in the pool. That will change your energy system, because it will change your emotional system, but not just emotions. The chemistry of your body will change because the state of your body changed from being into the pool going into the ocean. And
the rules change, each state changes.
Exactly.
The
state determines the rules.
Yeah.
So the state will determine your energy systems as well.
Yeah.
Like how you want to. It doesn't change the fact that the energy systems are what they are. Mm-hmm. It changes how you get into them and how fast they're going to evolve and what happens within them.
some of the science stuff that I would work on, with my former job, was that one of the things that one of the most fundamental things is the actual state of substance does dictate all of the scientific rules about it.
Exactly.
Meaning you take any different type of, say a refrigerant or a new compound, things like that, can absorb certain amounts of heat, can displace certain amounts of heat based upon solely whether it is liquid or gas.
Exactly.
And so meaning this same substance under a high enough pressure to become a liquid can then absorb so much heat.
Yeah.
Or almost none.
If it's in a gas form.
Then you as soon as you change the state, all of a sudden then it can absorb so much more, but then you have to, then it's going to, once it has so much, it's going to reach that saturation point. It then becomes liquid again, and then you have to displace that in order. And so it's very interesting.
It's exactly that. So,
but every rule of the same substance will change depending on
the state. Yeah. So what we're saying is that life is the same. Life does that. Like in our cases, the state of the nervous system will change the laws that are into play. Yeah. Like if you're toward the sympathetic side, you can burn fat. Parasympathetic, you will gain fat. The chemistry doesn't change. It's how when is the chemistry being applied?
Yeah.
That's what the state will change. So exactly that. And that's an extremely important part, because otherwise, if we just look at the chemistry set, then you're missing as to when it's going to happen. Mm-hmm. And so you can fuck it up very easily, because it's not a matter of what happens. Of course, it matters what happens, but we're studying it already. Yeah. The question is when, in what state does this apply? Otherwise, you can try to get to something and fuck it up every single time because you're missing the point that you need to be in a certain state for that law to take over.
Yeah, and if you didn't even know that a state change was a possibility and all of the things that will cascade down after that, then what do you... then the odds of all the work that you've done on the first thing
and our job is to better the odds.
Yeah.
That's what the program is. That's what the protocol is. Mm-hmm. It's not. We're not saying we're going to change the way the chemistry is set. It's not that. We're here to better the odds.
Yeah. Give you a better shot at making it work.
Exactly. Programming protocol is to better the odds. To better the odds, you have to understand intent. If you don't, you just. And again, that's not to say they're wrong on the chemistry. They're totally right. The problem is, can you use it? Can you access it? And if you don't understand intent, the odds of success are much lesser.
Yeah.
Where I'm playing with me is the odds. Because I'm playing with intent.
Yeah.
That's what.
And I think that's important. We talk about before we wrap up for today. What
I want to wrap up with the cancer.
Yes. So, but before we switch to that, when you talk about the odds, right? I think back to when we're talking about just the DNA, right?
Yeah.
The odds of that being successful in a short amount of time are pretty slim, right?
Yeah, it's calculated.
And so when you talk about then adding intent and purpose, you have much greater rate of success in a less amount of time. It is. It's all about improving the odds.
And it's keeping track too, right? Like nature keeps track of successes, so you can improve odds.
Yeah.
By the way, that goes back to the Bayesian blanket. That's exactly what Carl Friston is talking about. It's like life as a way of winning the odds.
Yeah.
Of keeping track. It's basically nature wants to play with loaded dice. A loaded dice. Nature would get banned out of Vegas so fast if you look at the odds of winning.
Yeah.
But that's what the system is. It's like, how do I trick? How do I play the odds better? How do I play with loaded dice?
Yeah.
And that's what...
Because if you are looking scientifically at things, that entropy is dice loaded in the other direction.
It always
goes
one way. Yeah.
That nature is up against some pretty hefty odds that I would say is inevitable.
Remember, random can be calculated, and it was.
Yeah.
And life doesn't obey, it's not random. Yeah. That we know, because we can calculate random.
Yeah.
And it's not random.
So let's talk about random. There is a very interesting segment in here where they talk about cancer.
Oh yeah, it's fascinating.
Very
stuff.
cool.
Right.
I have very limited understanding of it, but I've had things explained to me in very simple ways, right? And I'm sure it's never as simple. I'm sure there's many cases. But cancer cells essentially is replication gone wild. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Right? And if you look at leukemia, it's the white globules just like your immune system getting completely out of whack.
Yeah.
And so the white, not globules, the white cells, like the one that attacks stuff. Yeah. They replicate to a point where they attack everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what leukemia is.
Yeah, and
that's what the bone marrow.
And then say like a physical tumor, the way they look, it's cells in that location just
I love that.
gone wild.
Yeah. And then he metastasizes. That's the interesting part. Is he starts somewhere, then he metastasizes somewhere, and then replicates those cells, and then that cell. So it's basically a system of replication, right? That goes haywire.
Yeah, and it was always explained to me it was as a mutation. It was just essentially it was a mutation. But the way they approached it on this book was very interesting. Maybe I'll let you explain it.
Right. So,
because otherwise I'm going to miss it.
They basically had an idea was that cancer, in a way, is a form of defense. Right. Start as a form of defense that unfortunately kills the host. Why? Because as a form of defense, it's not designed to be worked into the host. So, I'll explain what they think cancer is, and then I'll explain how they tested for it. So, what they think is that cancer is an atavist way of defense. What do I mean by that? Atavist, which means it's a lot like the phylogenetic hierarchy that we talked about, right? When I talked about the states, is the phylogenetic hierarchy when it comes to nervous system is simple. Is that we have the most evolved part of the nervous system that will handle problems using the most evolved part. In that case, like the ventral vagus nerve. Anyway, so you start talking, you have problem, you start talking about it, you try to socialize. It doesn't work, you go to an older form of defense, which is fight, then to flight, then to freeze. Freeze being the oldest, which is playing dead, which is the oldest form of defense that we have. So that's what is called phylogenetic, is you work your way back to whenever one form of defense doesn't go, you go backwards, right? Fight to flight to freeze, right? It seems cancer, from what they are saying, is the same thing. Is that it's as the body is incapable of dealing with something, it starts to activate older and older genes. And at the end, it activates the oldest genes that we have, and which is in that sense the oldest form of defense that we have. And the oldest form of defense that we have goes back to when we were unicellular organism and its replication. Right? When you're a unicellular organism have a form of immortality, they replicate themselves. That way they stay alive, replicate, right? And so in that sense, that's the oldest form of defense that we have, of mechanism that we have, is replication. So they say cancer is basically us going from a newest form of defense that doesn't work, that works its way all the way down to our ultimate form of fighting death, which is replication, right? Except our body is not designed for that anymore, and so that replication going haywire is killing us.
And I think also it's safe to assume too that this, like that replication, is not concerned at that point with how its effect on the well-being of the whole organism. Because it can't. Because it's created first as a unicellular, which is I'm going to defend myself. Exactly. And so each cell is just creating. I've got a problem, I need a me solution. And it's replicate. Just like you see in society. First you think about society, when it's shit gowns down really bad, everybody takes off screaming, because then it's about me. So it seems the cell do the same. When they can't fight as a group, then they'll fight as individuals. And as an individual, a cell has only one defense, which is replication. Yeah, it's just got to get theirs. So in that sense, and then how do they know that? Because they tested by testing which genetic testing, based in a sense of they look at the cancer cell and which genes were being activated. And what they saw was it was a lot less of the newer gene being activated, but much more of the older ones. Yes. Right? And actually so there was almost you could draw, I think they even had a diagram. You could even see in there. Yes. They were like, okay, as it goes, when you get up to here, it is the oldest cells that are activated here. Exactly. Oldest part of the gene. Part of the gene, I'm sorry. Of the cell that is activated. So it basically, cancer develops just as an embryo. If you look at an embryo, it develops a liver, and then the cell go over there, and then they go crazy, and they develop a lung. Then they go over there and develop a heart. So cells go into specific places, and from that place, know to develop a heart and not a liver. Yeah. Right. So that's not DNA. That's actually epigenetics. And so it seems the cancer goes the same thing. It goes here, then it goes over there, and then duplicates everything here, but it doesn't create a liver. It creates more of a lung. Yeah. And that's what the growth is. And then it goes there, and then develop more of the brain. And so that's why those cancerous cells basically work like an embryo. So the point that we're making is that cancer cannot be cured. It can only be not triggered. Right? That the point is not to cure cancer, because you can't, because it's an ultimate form of defense. Yeah. So it cannot be cured. What it can be is basically not triggered. So if we understand epigenetics, that's our best way to go at cancer, because the cancer, again, in that case, cannot be cured because it's not a disease.
It's if is right, it's the oldest form of defense of the mechanism, and that cannot be turned off.
It is every cell fighting for its own existence.
And it cannot be turned off.
And for its evolutionary existence. The preservation of all of the information that cell has that has been accumulated over the course of all of our genome's entire existence matters. So, at least to it.
But that's a very important
and
part.
So it's just...
you want to stop cancer, that means you have to figure out the problem is now, instead of letting it go back. That means that whatever we have right now is not capable of facing the problem. That's what the true issue is with cancer. Whatever is triggering it is a problem, not cancer. So don't fix cancer. Fix whatever is triggering it. Right? Whatever aggression to the cell is causing it to regress.
Which is hard too, because we want solution. This is a problem I want to solve. And it's like, but the solution is a hard one.
Because then you have to figure out why it's being triggered in the first place. And so then you go into, is it food? Is it that's what the problem is. And you have to understand epigenetics. You have to understand what triggers such an aggression to the cell that it has to work backwards.
And it's actually, and it is important to say too, and they mentioned it here, they were able to go through and check, right? And so they could determine actually which ones were, because there is still an aspect of, there is a random mutation that can cause cancer, absolutely,
but
100%.
Again,
but it is when so
again,
they went
we're
through
going
this.
back to random. The problem is random has been calculated. Correct. It doesn't seem to be. So is there a mutation? Yes. Right. But as long as we are stuck with that random thing without understanding intent, we will never fully understand why things happen. You have to introduce intent, and again, for that you have to fight that religious bias that science had. That's what the quote from Einstein. I believe in order for us to move forward in science, we're going to have to understand where the bias comes from. Historically speaking and philosophically speaking, we have to study science, see where it comes from, and the fight that he had with especially the Catholic Church, let's be honest, what religion did to science so that we can move forward. We have to be able to go toward intent without falling into a religious talk. And that's that. But what fascinates me about cancer is that to me, it's exactly the same way the phylogenetic hierarchy of the states of the nervous system work. You cannot find a solution for the problem in your current state, you will regress, so atavistically speaking, to a former state in order to find a solution. So the key is not to stop the freeze mode. The key is manage to find a solution in flow, so that you don't have to go to freeze. But you can't eradicate freeze. Playing dead is necessary. So that would be eradicating cancer. It's like saying let's wipe out the freeze mode. No, the key is go in flow, figure out the problem in flow so you don't have to go to freeze. So how do you do that? Well, on the fitness level, that's what basically we started with the nose stuff. Is like get good at flow under pressure. If you get good at flow under pressure, there is no need to go to freeze anymore because you found a way to solve the problem in flow. So the key is always is get better at flow. Don't eradicate freeze. Don't go there. So it's like telling depressed people like remove all stressors. No. Get better at the stressors. That's what the way forward is. So what we want people to do is get better at flow so you don't have to go to freeze. That's the way how you get out of depression and stuff like that, is find a way to solve problem in the state you're in instead of having to change your state to answer that problem.
And I think this will be the perfect segue into what we do with the next episode. But for us to wrap up on, one of the things, so the subject of cancer and how we had kind of got to this is that you talk about this regression, right? There's just a regression of all of the layers to the point where at the very base, though, the one thing that whatever organism we are from, right, that system had to be good at is survival. And that is all action, no thinking.
Always, Survival of the fittest is totally true, by the way. Darwin is totally right. That is the basic intent of life, is surviving.
And as we have evolved very much all these new layers of the nervous system and everything on there, what we have up here then is lots of thinking and very little action. And so we're doing things in this space here because it's the way it works. And we can see, just for us to be healthy, we need to start to spend more time back there where we're doing a little less thinking, a little more action.
That's the problem, is the way the brain works right now is it's actually very, like the higher brain function consume a lot of energy. And that you have to take away from something, and that means you take it away from action so that you can spend it into the higher brain functions.
But it was cool because as the cancer subject was coming up, that tied in from how we would communicate, just how maybe we should train generally and all this stuff too. It's like, no. That's how this fucking cell works too. If it is in danger repeatedly, it is going to dial it all the way back down to the one most basic thing that it knows how to do. That's going to make fucking sure that I'm here tomorrow.
Yeah. So how do we use the states for us, right? So that's what we're going to talk about on the next one, is where is society heading from an evolutionary perspective, like on the state of the nervous system, like the flow. But being in flow, what does that mean? That's a higher brain function. What does that mean physically, right? Because it means a lot more of expenditure of energy, therefore a lot less movement.
Yeah.
And so, okay, but like right now we're not evolved physically for that. So that means we get fat, we get all the problems that come from not being able to move. So how do we play the odds better?
Yeah.
And that's what we're going to talk about on the next one, is how to play the odds of all this better.
Until then, Paul Davies,
The Demon in the Machine.
You get it on Amazon.
Yeah.
I don't know if you can get the
ebook. I couldn't find the ebook. It seems to be only hard copy right now. Okay. It is a heavy-ish book to read, I won't lie. But there's so many, like...
You will grab, what I found is going through, I would grab it. I'd be going and going. All of a sudden there's a paragraph where I'm like, this is just perfect.
Yes, exactly. So like, that's the key, by the way. So perfect. Don't start blasting us on YouTube about what about this, what about that. Read the book.
Yeah.
And then we can have a conversation. But you don't get to play semantics with us. Pick one thing we said, or maybe, by the way, this is a podcast. We go nonstop for an hour. Sometimes I use the wrong words, or I won't explain myself fully. You know what? Before you start using that to attack us on semantics, read the book. Once you've read it and understood it, then obviously then you can start criticizing us.
Yeah, for sure.
Those are the rules, right? Because remember, we both read it, right? This is where I spend my time, is reading shit like this. So you don't get to come, listen for an hour while being on the phone or while doing some shit and then go, you said that, and attack on semantics. There are rules to all this, and the rule is you have to read it because you have to become a better human being.
Yeah. Plus, if you like it, if you like the conversation, you'll like the book. If you didn't like the conversation, the book will do a better job convincing you than us.
Exactly. And if you don't like conversation or the book, go fuck yourself.
Go to funnyordie.com or something and watch.
Yeah, there's plenty of podcasts out there.
So, well, I think that's got us wrapped up for today. It's a long episode.
I'm sure it is. That was an important one.
It was really good. I'll be brief on the stuff. StrongFit.com, everything's there. StrongFitEquipment.com.eu. Julien's Corner is now officially.
Julien'sCorner.com is live and going.
Yep. So all your places for all your access to Julien is there.
There you go.
Manta Fitness.
Yep.
What else did we have?
StrongFit1 on Instagram.
StrongFit1 on Instagram. UK32 on Instagram. Tyler F. and Stone on Instagram. Richard's Rare Barracuda. Don't forget Richard.
Yep. Yes. He won't be happy.
The most handsome of the bunch.
Exactly. He has a smile and everything. Don't forget Richard.
Those goddamn perfect teeth. I'll never have that.
White. Mine are yellow, so that won't work. Yeah.
So, all right. Well, thanks a lot for listening, and we'll see you next week.